Nopung and Raegyong, new hopes of the Tongil rice family.
In this segment, we will examine how the catastrophic Nopung incident became a pivotal moment that exposed the unsustainability of the technological system of the Green Revolution. While the Nopung incident was fundamentally a natural disaster, the unexpectedly severe extent of damage can be attributed to policy failures as well. The Nopung incident refers to the widespread outbreak of rice-blast disease that devastated the newly introduced Nopung variety in 1978. This event significantly weakened the credibility of Tongil-type varieties among farmers who had already begun questioning their long-term viability. Although it would eventually leave its mark on history in an unfortunate way, Nopung was initially a highly promising variety that garnered expectations as a new hope capable of opening the future for Tongil-type varieties. January 1977, when optimism about the future of Tongil rice was prevalent, President Park Chung-hee had a meeting with the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries and directed, quote, "From now on, when new varieties are developed, name them after the scientists who conducted the research so that it becomes an honor passed down through generations," end quote. He must have been optimistic enough to forget about the previous misfortune of Hinong rice, which had been endorsed with an influential person's name. Following this directive, Iri 327 and Milyang 29, newly announced in 1977, were named Nopung and Raegyong respectively after their principal breeders Park Nopung and Park Raegyong. These varieties garnered significant attention as they not only showed improved yields compared to Tongil, but also featured enhanced eating quality comparable to contemporary Japonica varieties. In addition, Nopung showed improved shattering resistance and late planting tolerance, as well as resistance to rice blast disease and bacterial leaf blight. Both varieties entered rapid large-scale cultivation immediately after trial cultivation. Nopung occupied around 15% of the total rice cultivation area in its debut season, while Raegyong began to be cultivated across around 5,000 hectares. The government's decision to proceed with such dramatic large-scale cultivation without hesitation demonstrates that their confidence in new varieties have reached its peak.
The looming threat of rice blast disease.
Nonetheless, farmers' distrust had been accumulated as each newly introduced varieties of Tongil type succumbed to new diseases. Moreover, by the late 1970s, even Tongil's resistance to the blast disease began showing signs of weakening. Rice blast disease, or Pedicularia oryzae, is a fungal infection that causes one of the most severe crop diseases affecting rice cultivation. The disease can manifest in almost all parts of the rice plant, including leaves, stem nodes, panicle neck, and panicles. The probability of infection increases when the weather is humid, excessive nitrogen fertilizers are applied. Like any other microorganisms, rice blast pathogens are always subject to mutation and evolution. Due to these constant changes of fungal characteristics, resistance of rice against specific blast can never be permanent. Even varieties that show resistance to existing pathogens can become susceptible to infection when new physiological types emerge. Tongil rice demonstrated high resistance to rice blast disease until 1975 to the extent that, according to some scientists' memory, from 1971 to 1977, the farmers virtually forgot about the blast. However, the emergence of new rice blasts capable of infecting Tongil varieties was merely a matter of time and had been actually anticipated since the variety's initial distribution. Many agricultural scientists, including Moon-He, raised concerns about the need to prepare countermeasures because it would be a catastrophic disaster if the nationwide monoculture of Tongil-type rice became susceptible to a new blast. Administrative officials, however, took a different stance. Focused solely on expanding Tongil rice distribution despite farmers' complaints, they hesitated to raise concerns about rice blast disease for fear of alarming farmers. They believed that discussing disease susceptibility prematurely would only heighten farmers' anxiety. Consequently, in the mid-1970s, despite the recognition that Tongil rice would eventually be susceptible, genetic diversity of rice in the field kept decreasing. Signs of weakening blast resistance in Tongil rice began to appear. In 1976 and 1977, leaf blast lesions were gradually discovered in Tongil-type varieties across the country. However, except for professional agricultural scientists, few paid attention to these localized occurrences of rice blast disease amid nationwide celebrations of reaching 40 million seok in production.
The rice blast finally strikes the Tongil rice.
The spring of 1978 experienced the severe drought conditions from April 10th to early June, compared to the average rainfall of 200 millimeters between March and May. That year saw only 10 millimeters during the same period. Due to the drought, rice transplanting was delayed and the seedbed period was extended, leading to the outbreak of rice blast disease in seedlings starting from the southern regions in late May. By early June, the disease had spread to delayed transplanting seedbeds nationwide. When continuous monsoon rains persisted from late June to mid-July, the seedling blast developed into leaf blast. The new Tongil varieties, Nopung and Miryang 23, accounted for 84% of the affected area, and virtually all 13 Tongil-type varieties being distributed at the time showed some degree of leaf blast infection. The rain continued from early to mid-August, and Typhoon Carmen passed through the Korean peninsula between August 15th and 20th. As a result, the leaf blast persisted into August and began developing into panicle blast. Since panicle blast directly affects yield, the yield of Tongil-type varieties dropped down. The total area affected by panicle blast in 1978 reached 13% of the total rice cultivation area, with 98.9% occurring in Tongil-type varieties and only 1.1% in conventional Japonica varieties. In terms of area, 16.6% of Tongil-type varieties were infected with the new blast race, with particularly high infection rates in the newly distributed varieties. 66% of Nopung and 53% of Raegyong were infected. Combined with the damage from the brown plant hopper, average rice yield per danbo decreased to 474 kilograms, a reduction of 20 kilograms compared to 1977. While this year's harvest still represented the second highest unit yield in history, it was widely perceived as a failure, in contrast to the high optimism prevalent earlier. The concentration of blast damage in the two varieties, Nopung and Raegyeong, which the government has enthusiastically promoted from 1978, intensified farmers' doubts about the stability of the new varieties. In some regions, farmers growing Nopung couldn't even rent threshing machines because machine owners who took 3 to 4% of the harvest for a rent fee avoided Nopung with its high proportion of empty grains and broken rice.
Inadequate government compensation and farmers' resistance.
Given the concentration of rice blast damage in the newly distributed Nopung and Raegyeong varieties, questioning the potential defects of the new varieties was inevitable. However, Kim In-hwan, who had regarded the distribution of Tongil-type new varieties as his personal mission, responded defensively and refused to acknowledge the Rural Development Administration's responsibility. His high-handed response amid heightened farmer emotions only served to intensify farmers' anger and opposition parties' criticism. To mitigate the criticisms, Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries promised investigation and compensation. However, even this compensation plan was poorly implemented. Throughout the country, government officials, fearing reprimand for improper agricultural guidance, either conducted incomplete damage assessments or underreported damages. Responding to National Assembly members' intense questioning, Minister Jang Deok-jin stated, quote, "From next year, we will leave rice variety selection, including Nopung and other varieties, to farmers, while the government focuses on agricultural technology dissemination." End quote. In the 10th general election held on December 12th that year, the ruling Republican Party secured only 31.7% of votes across 154 constituency seats. While the party barely maintained a majority thanks to the Yushin Constitution, which allowed the president to appoint 1/3 of National Assembly members, it effectively suffered a decisive defeat to the opposition. The loss of public support due to the Nopung crisis appears to have been one factor in this defeat. The Nopung incident served as a catalyst for organized farmer resistance. Discontent, which had previously been expressed in isolated instances, began to coalesce into broader social movements. Organizations such as the Korean Catholic Farmers Association spearheaded campaigns for fair compensation and policy reforms. By the early 1980s, farmers' advocacy groups had become key players in shaping agricultural policy debates, marking the emergence of a more politically engaged rural population.